It was 3:15 p.m. on a Thursday when I heard the knock on my front door. Not a friendly neighbor knock, not a delivery knock, but that sharp, aggressive knock that means someone's about to ruin your day. I opened the door to find Margaret Thompson standing there with her perfectly styled gray hair, her HOA clipboard, and two men in cheap suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Jessica Martinez," she announced like she was reading from a legal document, "I'm here to inform you that you have 72 hours to vacate this property." I blinked at her, thinking I must have misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Margaret smiled, that cold, satisfied smile she always wore when she was about to destroy someone's life. "Your property is in violation of 17 different HOA regulations. The structure is non-compliant, your landscaping doesn't meet community standards, and frankly, this eyesore doesn't belong in our prestigious neighborhood." I looked behind her at my century-old farmhouse, the house my great-great-grandfather built with his own hands in 1924, the house where 4 generations of my family had been born, lived, and died. The house that had been standing on this land long before Margaret Thompson was even a twinkle in her father's eye. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think there's been some mistake. This is my family's property. We've lived here for over 100 years. Margaret laughed, that sharp, dismissive laugh that made me want to slam the door in her face. "Honey, I don't care if your family built the pyramids. This neighborhood has standards now, and your little farmhouse doesn't meet them. These gentlemen," she gestured to the 2 uncomfortable-looking men, "are from the county assessor's office. They're here to witness the official eviction notice." One of the men stepped forward, looking apologetic. "Ma'am, we're not actually here for an eviction. We're just here to assess property values for the HOA's Community Improvement Initiative." Margaret shot him a look that could have melted steel. "What Mr. Peterson means is that we're giving you the opportunity to sell voluntarily before we're forced to take more drastic measures." That's when it hit me. Margaret Thompson wasn't just being her usual power-hungry self. She was trying to force me off my own land. Land that my family had owned since before there was even a town here. Land that had been in the Martinez family longer than most people had been alive. "Let me get this straight," I said, feeling my temper rising. "You're telling me to leave the property that my family has owned for a century because it doesn't meet your HOA standards?" "Exactly," Margaret said, checking something off on her clipboard. "This outdated structure is bringing down property values for the entire community. We have buyers lined up who are willing to pay top dollar for this lot, assuming we can clear away all this history." History. She called my family's legacy history like it was something to be thrown in the trash. "Mrs. Thompson," I said, trying one more time to be reasonable, "this house was here before your HOA existed. Before most of these other houses existed. We're not part of your homeowners association." Margaret's smile got even colder. "Oh, but you are now, dear. When the neighborhood was incorporated last year, all properties within the designated boundaries became subject to HOA regulations. That includes your little farm. And your property is so far out of compliance, it's not even funny." She handed me a thick stack of papers. "Violations include non-standard roofing materials, unapproved exterior paint colors, inappropriate agricultural use of residential land, failure to maintain approved landscaping, non-compliant fence materials, and about 12 other infractions. The fines alone total over $40,000. I stared at the papers in shock. $40,000 in fines for living in the house my family built, on the land my family owned, maintaining the farm that had fed this community for generations. "This is insane," I said. "You can't just show up and demand $40,000 in fines for a house that was here before your HOA existed." "Actually," Margaret said, "we can. And if you can't pay the fines, we'll be forced to place a lien on the property. Eventually we'll have to foreclose. It's really quite simple." That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't about HOA violations or community standards. This was about Margaret Thompson and her cronies wanting to get their hands on prime real estate. My property sat on 5 acres right in the heart of what had become a very expensive neighborhood. To them, I wasn't a neighbor. I was an obstacle standing between them and a multi-million-dollar development opportunity. "I need to make some phone calls," I said. Margaret checked her watch. "Of course, dear. You have 72 hours to figure it out. But I should warn you, fighting this will only make it more expensive. The smart thing would be to take the offer we're prepared to make and find somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle." As they walked away, I heard Margaret talking to one of the assessors. "The demolition company said they can have the structures down in 2 weeks. We'll need to move fast once we get the property." Demolition company. They were already planning to tear down my family's home. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands shaking as I looked at the violation notices. Every single thing they'd cited was part of what made this place special. The original cedar shake roof that my great-grandfather had installed, the barn red paint that had been the same color for 80 years, the vegetable garden where my grandmother had taught me to grow tomatoes, the split-rail fence that my father had built with his own hands. They wanted to destroy everything and replace it with another cookie-cutter McMansion. That's when I made the phone call that would change everything. Uncle Roberto? It's Jessica. I need your help. Someone's trying to take the farm. Roberto Martinez wasn't just my uncle, he was the town historian, the keeper of all our family records, and the one person who knew every detail of our family's history in this place. When I explained what was happening, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that meant someone was about to learn a very hard lesson. Jessica, he said, I think it's time Mrs. Thompson learned a little bit about the history she's so eager to demolish. Can you meet me at the town hall tomorrow morning? And bring those violation notices with you. The next morning I met Uncle Roberto at the town hall. He was carrying a box of documents that looked like they'd been preserved since the founding of the country. The town clerk, Mrs. Patterson, greeted him like an old friend. Roberto, what brings you here? More research for the Historical Society? Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I need to look up some property records. It seems someone's been making claims about the Martinez property that need to be clarified. For the next 3 hours, Uncle Roberto spread documents across a table while Mrs. Patterson pulled up records on her computer. What they found was exactly what Uncle Roberto had expected, but it was going to blow Margaret Thompson's little power play completely out of the water. Jessica, Uncle Roberto said, pointing to a surveyor's map from 1924, do you know who founded this town? I had a pretty good idea, but I let him tell me. Your great-great-grandfather, Miguel Martinez? He owned all this land, thousands of acres. When the railroad came through in 1923, he donated 500 acres to establish the town. He gave land for the school, the church, the town square, even the cemetery. This whole community exists because Miguel Martinez wanted to create a place where families could build good lives. Mrs. Patterson was nodding as she looked at her computer screen. It's all here in the original town charter. The Martinez family are listed as founding benefactors. There are special provisions protecting their property rights in perpetuity. What kind of provisions? I asked. Uncle Roberto smiled. The kind that mean no HOA, no city council, no county commissioner, and certainly no power-hungry neighbor can force you off your family's land. Miguel Martinez was a smart man. He knew that someday people might try to take advantage of his generosity, so he built protections into the town's founding documents. But what about the HOA? I asked. Margaret said all properties in the area are now subject to their regulations. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. That's not possible. The Martinez property predates any HOA by decades, and it has special historical status. No homeowners association has jurisdiction over a founding family's original property. It's protected under state historical preservation laws. Uncle Roberto was pulling out more documents. And there's something else Margaret Thompson doesn't know. The land her precious HOA sits on? That was part of the original Martinez grant. Which means technically your family still holds certain rights over the entire development. What kind of rights? Water rights for one. The creek that runs through the development springs from your property. Mineral rights too. And access rights? There are historical easements that run right through the middle of their fanciest houses. I was starting to understand why Uncle Roberto had been laughing on the phone. So when Margaret Thompson threatens to evict me? She's threatening to evict a founding family member from property that's legally protected by the town charter, state law, and about 6 different historical preservation statutes. It's like trying to evict George Washington from Mount Vernon. Mrs. Patterson was pulling up more records. Oh my, this is interesting. The HOA's incorporation documents show they claimed authority over your property without doing a proper title search. That's a very big mistake. How big? I asked. The kind of mistake that could void their entire incorporation, Uncle Roberto said. You can't claim authority over property you have no legal right to control. And you certainly can't assess fines and threaten foreclosure on property that's protected by state and federal law. That afternoon, I called Margaret Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, this is Jessica Martinez. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your HOA's claims regarding my property. She sounded pleased, probably thinking I was ready to surrender. Wonderful, dear. I knew you'd see reason. Shall we say tomorrow at 2? I'll bring the paperwork for the sale. Actually, I'd prefer to meet at the town hall. And I'll be bringing my own paperwork. There was a pause. The town hall? Why on earth would we meet there? Because I think you'll want to review some documents before you proceed with your current course of action. Trust me, Mrs. Thompson, it's in your best interest. The next day, Margaret Thompson arrived at the town hall with 3 other HOA board members and a lawyer who looked like he charged by the minute. They found me waiting in the conference room with Uncle Roberto, Mrs. Patterson, and enough historical documents to fill a small library. Margaret took one look at the setup and her confident smile faltered slightly. Jessica, what's all this about? I thought we were here to finalize your departure from the neighborhood. Actually, I said, we're here to discuss your departure from my family's land. The lawyer leaned forward. I'm sorry, what? Uncle Roberto stood up, and suddenly the retired history teacher became the authority on a century of local law and precedent. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Jessica Martinez, great-great-granddaughter of Miguel Martinez, founder of this town and original owner of all the land your HOA currently sits on. Margaret waved dismissively. That's ancient history. We're dealing with current property law. Actually, Mrs. Patterson said, we're dealing with foundational property law. Laws that supersede any HOA regulations or recent ordinances. Uncle Roberto spread out the original town charter. Miguel Martinez donated land to establish this community in 1924. In exchange, the town charter granted permanent protections to the Martinez family property, ensuring that no future development or regulation could force them from their land. Margaret's lawyer was looking at the documents with growing concern. These appear to be authentic historical records. They are, Mrs. Patterson confirmed, recorded in the county registry, filed with the State Historical Society, and protected under federal preservation laws. The Martinez property isn't just exempt from HOA regulations, it's legally impossible for any HOA to claim authority over it. Margaret was turning red. This is ridiculous. We're not trying to steal anyone's land. We're just enforcing community standards. Community standards, I repeated. On land that my family owned before your community existed. Land that's protected by laws you apparently never bothered to research. Uncle Roberto pulled out another document. Speaking of research, did you know that the creek running through your development originates on Martinez property? And that the family retained water rights when the land was originally parceled out? The HOA board members were looking at each other nervously. What does that mean? One of them asked. It means, Uncle Roberto said with a smile, that the Martinez family has the legal right to divert or restrict water flow to protect their property. Water that currently feeds the irrigation systems for your golf course, your decorative fountains, and your landscaping. Margaret's face was getting redder by the minute. You can't be serious. Oh, it gets better, Uncle Roberto continued. The original easement agreements also grant the Martinez family access rights across the entire development. Historical access routes that run right through your most expensive neighborhoods. I was starting to enjoy this. So theoretically, I could drive my farm equipment across your pristine lawns anytime I need to access the back portions of my property? Mrs. Patterson nodded. It's all in the original agreements. The Martinez family retained all historical use rights when the land was developed. Margaret's lawyer was frantically taking notes. This is a significant legal complication. No, Uncle Roberto said, this is what happens when you don't do your homework before threatening a founding family. Margaret was sputtering now. This has to be illegal. You can't use 100-year-old documents to what? I asked. To protect my family's legal rights? To stop you from illegally claiming authority over property you have no right to control. Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Patterson said gently, your HOA's incorporation documents are legally invalid. You claimed authority over protected property without proper research or legal standing. That voids your entire incorporation. The room went quiet as the implications sank in. What does that mean exactly? One of the board members whispered. Uncle Roberto was clearly enjoying himself. It means your HOA doesn't legally exist. All your regulations, all your fines, all your authority, none of it has any legal standing. Margaret looked like she was about to have a heart attack. That's impossible. We've been operating for 2 years. We've collected dues, enforced regulations, issued fines. Illegally, her own lawyer said quietly. If the incorporation is invalid, then every action taken by the HOA could be challenged in court. I leaned back in my chair. So let me understand this correctly. You threatened to evict me from property that's legally protected. You assessed fines you have no authority to collect. And in the process, you invalidated your entire organization. This is insane. Margaret shouted. You can't just waltz in here with dusty old papers and claim you own the whole town. I don't own the whole town, I said calmly. My great-great-grandfather gave most of his land away to create this community. But what he kept, he protected. And what he protected, you can't touch. Uncle Roberto was pulling out more documents. Should we tell them about the mineral rights? Or the timber rights? Or the fact that technically, their golf course is built on land that was never properly transferred from the Martinez estate? Margaret's face went from red to white. What are you talking about? It seems, Mrs. Patterson said, consulting her computer, that when the development was planned, the surveyor made some errors. About 15 acres of what's now your golf course is actually still Martinez property. It was never legally sold or transferred. I couldn't help but smile. So not only do you have no authority to evict me, but you've been operating a business on my family's land without permission. The HOA board members were looking at Margaret like she just burned down their houses. Their lawyer was packing up his briefcase and looked like he was planning to bill them for a lot of hours. What do you want? Margaret asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. First, I said, I want a formal apology. In writing. Acknowledging that you had no legal right to threaten my family or our property. Margaret nodded reluctantly. Second, I want all fines and violations against my property officially voided and expunged from any records. Another nod. Third, I want a guarantee that no one from your organization will ever again attempt to claim authority over Martinez family property. Done, Margaret whispered. And finally, I said, standing up, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember what happens when you try to bully people without understanding who you're dealing with. Uncle Roberto gathered up the historical documents. Oh, and Mrs. Thompson? You might want to consult with a real estate lawyer about returning all those HOA dues you collected illegally, and the fines you assessed without authority, and the liens you placed on people's homes without legal standing. As we walked out of the town hall, I could hear Margaret's voice rising behind us as she realized the full scope of what her power trip was going to cost her. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was spectacular. The HOA had to be completely dissolved and reincorporated, this time with proper legal research and without any claims to Martinez property. Margaret Thompson resigned in disgrace and moved to another state, apparently to avoid the lawsuits from homeowners who wanted their illegally collected fees refunded. The golf course issue was resolved when the development company agreed to pay my family fair market rent for the 15 acres they'd been using without permission. It turned out to be quite a nice little income stream. But the best part was watching the neighborhood transform once Margaret's reign of terror ended. The new HOA board was made up of reasonable people who understood that community standards should bring people together, not tear them apart. They even asked my family to serve on the Historical Preservation Committee, recognizing that we were the living link to the town's founding story. I still live in my great-great-grandfather's farmhouse, with its cedar shake roof and barn red paint and split-rail fence. The vegetable garden still produces tomatoes every summer, and the creek still runs through the property just like it has for 100 years. Sometimes I see new neighbors out walking and they stop to admire the old house. When they ask about its history, I tell them about Miguel Martinez, who came here with nothing but a dream and built a community that would last for generations. I tell them about a man who understood that true wealth isn't about having the biggest house or the most perfect lawn, it's about creating something that will outlast you. And sometimes, when I'm working in the garden or fixing the fence, I think about Margaret Thompson and her violation notices. I think about how she looked at my family's century of history and saw nothing but an obstacle to her grand plans. She forgot that this land has a story. She forgot that communities are built by people who care about something bigger than themselves. Most importantly, she forgot that you should always know who you're dealing with before you pick a fight. Because sometimes, the person you're trying to push around turns out to be the descendant of the person who founded the town you're living in. Sometimes, that quiet farmhouse holds more legal power than your entire HOA. And sometimes, the history you're so eager to demolish is the only thing standing between your community and complete legal chaos. Margaret Thompson learned all of this the hard way. But then again, bullies usually do.